Okay, Luke 23, starting in verse 13. And Pilate, when he had called together the chief priests and the rulers and the people, said unto them, You have brought this man unto me as one that perverts the people. And behold, I, having examined him before you, have found no fault in this man touching those things whereof you accuse him. No, nor yet Herod, for I sent you to him, and lo, nothing worthy of death is done unto him. I will therefore chastise him and release him. For of necessity he must release one unto them at the feast. And they cried out all at once, saying, Away with this man, and release unto us Barnabas, who for a certain sedition made in the city, and for murder, was cast into prison. Pilate, therefore, willing to release Yeshua, spoke again to them. But they cried, saying, Crucify him, crucify him. And he said unto them the third time, Why? What evil has he done? I have found no cause of death in him. I will therefore chastise him and let him go. And they were instant with loud voices, requiring that he might be crucified. And the voices of them and of the chief priests prevailed. And Pilate gave sentence that it should be as they required. You find that in Luke 23, verse 13 to 24. A poet once said, Of all the words of tongue or pen, the saddest are these, it might have been. If that's true, then one of the most tragic words in human language must be the word almost. Almost speaks of aborted opportunities and missed chances. And I'm sure that as long as this world exists, almost will dot the pages of human history. I almost climbed the mountain. We almost reached our goal. I almost closed the deal. We almost got there in time. We all had those almost experiences. I suppose that the most infamous almoster in history would have been Pilate, because he almost released Yeshua. He almost lowered the gavel and said, Not guilty. He almost said, I dismiss all the charges because this man is innocent. He almost set him free. What a change that would have made in our perception of Pilate. We might even be calling him Saint Pilate today. He almost did it, but he didn't. Yet he could have. That's his tragedy. He had the authority to do it. He wore the signet ring that said he had the power to do it. All he had to do was speak the word decisively, and Yeshua would have been set free. And he did it, almost. Verse 23 says, But with loud shouts they insistently demanded that he be put to the stake, and their shouts prevailed. So Pilate decided to grant their demand. He listened to their voices. We could even say, I suppose, that he listened to the voice of evil, to the voice of Satan. He'd heard the voices. Voices saying, Go on ahead, just do it. No one will ever know. Just one little drink won't hurt. Satan beckons us into paths we should not go. But Pilate didn't have to listen to those voices. There were other voices he could have listened to. He could have listened to his wife, who sent a note that said, Don't have anything to do with that innocent man, for I've suffered a great deal today in a dream because of him. Matthew 27, verse 19. When he was set down on the judgment seat, his wife sent unto him, saying, Have nothing to do with that just man, for I have suffered many things this day in a dream because of him. He could have listened to her voice, and he almost did. He could have listened to his own voice. Pilate was no dummy. He knew what was going on. He knew that Annas and Caiaphas, the chief priests, were corrupt and greedy. He knew they were lying about Yeshua. He could have listened to his own voice, to reason, to common sense. He almost did. But he didn't. Pilate is not the only one who has played the game of almost. Some of us have played that game. I almost made the decision today to be baptized. I almost said, "Here I am, Lord, use me." But the Bible clearly teaches us that there are no almost with Yahweh. There is no almost in the kingdom of Yahweh. No almost place where we can go. It's either the kingdom of heaven or death. And Pilate's tragedy could be our tragedy too. So when we open our Bible and begin to read the story of Yeshua, we read about being placed on the stake. Even though Pilate came that close to freeing Yeshua, he didn't. So as we view that scene, we see soldiers going about their task. They were used to putting people on a stake. They had done it many times before. First, they laid the stake down upon the ground. Then they placed Yeshua and the two thieves upon them, driving sharp spikes through their hands and feet. Then they hoisted the rough wooden stakes into the air and dropped them into the holes that had held stakes before. And then they were done. Yeshua was dying. You would think by now Annas and Caiaphas would have been satisfied, but there was something about the sign placed on the stake that angered them. It read, "Yeshua, King of the Jews." Once again, they stormed into the presence of Pilate, and we could only wish that Pilate had been as firm and decisive as earlier as he was shown him to be now. For when they came rushing into his presence, protesting the wording of the sign, Pilate says, "That's enough. What I have written, I have written. The sign stays. Yeshua, King of the Jews." So there he hangs between heaven and earth. Looking through tears and blood, he could see the faces of the people who had gathered around him. It was an unusually large crowd, perhaps, for there were no football games or soccer matches to watch in that day. So they went to watch an execution. And as we view that scene and look at their faces, we look for a friendly face, someone we might recognize. Where's Peter? Surely Peter would have shown up, but Peter's not there. Nor James, nor Andrew, or Bartholomew. The soldiers gathered underneath the stake and began throwing dice, gambling for his robe. And every time we look at those soldiers, we see a little bit of ourselves, don't we? Sometimes we're so close to the stake and yet so far away. They were right there, right next to the blood that was dropping to the ground. They could hear the cries of pain. They could look up at any time they wanted to see Yeshua dying there. And yet, their minds were someplace else. They were rolling dice to see who would get his robe. Listen, Yeshua's praying, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. Father, forgive the soldiers who drove the nails into my hands. Forgive Pilate, who found me innocent but sentenced me to die anyways. Forgive Annas and Caiaphas and the Sanhedrin and all the rest. Father, forgive the believers who meet at the church in Panama City, Florida, because their sins nailed me here too. Yes, Father, forgive them all." I don't know if we could ever pray that kind of prayer. Sometimes we have a hard time getting along with our neighbors. Sometimes we have a hard time forgiving our spouses or our children or even our brothers and sisters. But yet Yeshua taught us to pray. Forgive us our sins as we forgive those who sin against us. The gospel tells us that Yeshua spoke 7 times on the stake. 3 times he spoke before the darkness came. Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. Then he turned to one of the thieves and said, you shall be with me in paradise. He also looked at Mary, his mother, and John, the apostle, and said, woman, behold your son, and son, behold your mother. Suddenly darkness covered the earth. The winds started to blow. Lightning and thunder rolled across the sky, and even the ground began to shake. And when the storm was at its height, Yeshua cried out, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani. Those who stood in the distance could barely hear his words. Some said maybe he calls for Elijah. Let's see if Elijah comes. But those who were closest heard what he said. My El, why have you forsaken me? At that moment in time, the sins of the world, your sins and mine, caused Yahweh our Father to turn his face from his Son. Then darkness left, and 3 more cries came from his lips. I thirst. It is finished. And Father, into your hands I commend my spirit. Then it's all over. The greatest victory of all had been won. On a hill that looked like a skull outside of Jerusalem, everything that Yahweh had worked for and planned was finally realized in the death and burial and ultimate resurrection of Yeshua. You know, there's probably nothing more consistent about life than its inconsistencies. Life is like a tossed salad, isn't it? You stick your fork in and you never know for sure what you're going to get. Life is like a roller coaster with its ups and downs and twists and turns, and you never really know what will happen next. But if there is one very strong message that comes to us from Calvary, it is that Yahweh is able to weave it all together. He could take all the inconsistencies, all the fragments and pieces of our life, and weave them together into a beautiful tapestry, just as he planned. And that is a message we need to hear, because one day the sun shines and the next it rains. One day we think everything's going our way, and the next our world comes crashing down around us. One moment we're young and healthy. The next, the doctor tells us that he has some bad news for us. Yet Yeshua is saying, it really doesn't matter, because all of you who have really committed yourself to me will find righteousness and goodness and victory, not defeat. You'll find that your despair is replaced with eternal hope, because that is the message of Calvary. So in the light of all that, our prayer ought to be, O Yahweh, Almighty Elohim, help us never ever to look at the stake and see the one who died there without feeling the touch of a tear on our cheek, without feeling our hearts strangely moved and broken. Let us never come there, Yahweh, and just casually look at it and almost be moved by it, but then turn away from it and go on with life as usual. You see, the ultimate tragedy in every worship service is that there are people who are almost ready to make a decision. There are people who stand right on the brink of saying, I surrender all. I'm going to follow Yeshua. And they almost do it. Others are just like those soldiers casting dice at the feet of Yeshua. They're so engrossed in what they're doing that they never look up and let the message sink in and make a change in their lives. They're so near and yet so far. So once again, praying that if you're almost there, you won't turn away like Caiaphas and Annas and pilot and the soldiers, but that you will look, see, and listen and make that decision. Yeah, we blessed.